Disclaimer. The following stories you are about to hear are purely fictional and created for entertainment purposes only. Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I found a forum on the dark web that predicted Donald Trump's death. Alright guys, this is probably the most insane thing that's ever happened to me. I don't usually post on here, but I need to get this off my chest before I lose my mind. So, a couple of months ago, I was bored and curious about all the hype around the dark web. You know, the usual stuff about hidden sites, shady deals, and creepy forums. I've always had a bit of a morbid curiosity, so I decided to check it out. I've got a decent tech background, so it wasn't too hard for me to set up Tor and get browsing. At first, it was all pretty mundane, just a bunch of random marketplaces selling drugs, fake IDs, and other illegal crap. But then, I stumbled upon this one forum. It didn't have a name, just a string of random numbers and letters. The layout was basic, nothing fancy, but the discussions were unsettling, to say the least. Most of the threads were about conspiracy theories, government cover-ups, and weird occult stuff. But one thread caught my eye: predictions. The posts were dated back years, and what freaked me out the most was how accurate they were. There were predictions about natural disasters, political scandals, and even celebrity deaths. All of them had come true, down to the smallest detail. I was both fascinated and horrified. I mean, it's one thing to read about conspiracies, but this was something else entirely. I spent hours scrolling through the posts, my heart racing with each new prediction. And then I saw it. A post from about a year ago that made my blood run cold. The title was simple: Donald Trump's death, January 5th, 2025. The post was chillingly detailed. It described how Trump would die in a mysterious car accident in New York City, right outside Trump Tower. The car would explode on impact, leaving no survivors. There were even specifics about the time, 11:23 p.m., and the fact that it would happen during a snowstorm. I was shaking as I read it, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as some elaborate prank, but the accuracy of the other predictions made it hard to ignore. I decided to dig deeper into the forum, hoping to find some explanation, or at least some reassurance that this was all just a sick joke. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed. I barely slept, spending all my free time on that forum. I started recognizing some of the users. There were a few regulars who seemed to know more than they let on. One user, in particular, stood out: Oracle_666. They were the one who made most of the predictions, including the one about Trump. I tried to reach out to Oracle_666, but they never responded to my messages. Instead, I found myself getting sucked into more and more disturbing threads. There were discussions about human experiments, underground cults, and even live-stream torture sessions. The deeper I went, the more I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. One night, I was browsing the forum when I got a message from an unknown user. The message was short and cryptic: "Meet me at the following address if you want to know the truth." There was an address in New York City, not too far from Trump Tower. My heart pounded as I read it. I knew I should ignore it, but something inside me needed answers. Against my better judgment, I decided to go. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that it was all just some elaborate hoax, but deep down, I knew there was something more to it. I packed a bag and drove to New York, my mind racing with fear and excitement. When I arrived at the address, it was a run-down apartment building, the kind of place where you wouldn't want to be caught alone at night. I hesitated at the entrance, my instincts screaming at me to turn back, but I pushed forward, driven by a morbid curiosity. I found the apartment number from the message and knocked on the door. It creaked open, revealing a dark, musty room. A single flickering light bulb cast eerie shadows on the walls. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw a figure sitting in the corner, hunched over a computer. Oracle _666? I asked, my voice trembling. The figure turned to face me, and I nearly screamed. It was an old man, his face gaunt and covered in scars. His eyes were empty, devoid of any emotion. He gestured for me to sit down, and I reluctantly complied. "You want to know the truth," he rasped, his voice like nails on a chalkboard. "The predictions, they're not just guesses, they're warnings." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Warnings about what?" He leaned closer, his breath foul and hot against my face. "The world is not what it seems. There are forces at play that you can't even begin to comprehend. The predictions, they're a way to control the narrative, to keep people in line." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Who's behind it?" The old man's eyes glinted with a sinister light. "You don't want to know, but trust me, Trump's death is just the beginning. There are worse things coming." I wanted to leave, to run as far away from that place as possible, but I was frozen in place, unable to tear myself away from his gaze. He handed me a piece of paper, covered in strange symbols and cryptic messages. "Take this," he said. "It will help you understand, but be careful. Once you know the truth, there's no going back." I took the paper, my hands shaking. As I left the apartment, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I knew that I had crossed a line, that my life would never be the same. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that it was all just a bad dream. But deep down, I knew that the nightmare was just beginning. Over the next few days, I tried to decipher the symbols on the paper. They seemed to be some sort of code, but I couldn't make any sense of it. The more I tried, the more obsessed I became. I started seeing things, hearing whispers in the dark. My friends and family noticed the change in me, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. Then, on January 5th, 2025, it happened. The news broke late at night. Donald Trump had died in a car accident outside Trump Tower. The details matched the prediction exactly. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I watched the footage, my mind reeling with fear and disbelief. I knew then that I had to find Oracle _666 again. I had to understand what was happening. But when I returned to the apartment, it was empty. The old man was gone, and the place had been ransacked. I felt a sense of hopelessness wash over me. I was in too deep, and there was no way out. As I write this, I can feel them watching me. The shadows in the corners of my room seem to move, and I hear whispers in the night. I don't know how much longer I can hold on, but I had to tell someone, had to warn you all. If you ever find that forum, turn back. Don't make the same mistake I did. Because once you know the truth, there's no escaping it. The days after Trump's death were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that somehow My involvement with that dark web forum had put me on some kind of hit list. My paranoia grew worse with each passing day. I began noticing black SUVs parked near my apartment, strange men in suits who seemed to always be around no matter where I went. I tried to stay off the grid as much as possible, avoiding my usual routines, but it didn't seem to matter. They always knew where I was. I even caught one of them following me into a grocery store, pretending to browse the produce aisle. His eyes never left me. I decided to confront him, hoping to shake him off my tail. I walked up to him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Why are you following me?" He didn't flinch. His expression was cold, almost robotic. "You need to be careful," he said in a low voice. "They're watching you. They know what you know." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, more confused and terrified than ever. I knew I couldn't go back to my apartment. It wasn't safe. I needed to disappear, at least until I could figure out what was going on. I checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of the town, paying cash and using a fake name. The room was dingy and smelled of mildew, but it was a temporary refuge. I barricaded the door with a chair and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of everything. The paper the old man had given me was my only clue, but I still couldn't decipher it. I decided to reach out to an old friend from college, Mark. He was a cryptographer and had helped the government with some high-level projects. If anyone could crack the code, it was him. I called him from a payphone using a burner cell to make sure the call couldn't be traced. "Mark, it's me. I need your help. It's urgent." There was a long pause before he responded. "What's going on, man? You sound freaked out." "I can't explain everything over the phone. I need to meet you in person. Can you come to the Old Pine Motel, room 13? It's off Route 5. "All right, I'll be there in an hour." When Mark arrived, I could see the concern in his eyes. I hadn't seen him in years, and I must have looked like a wreck. I handed him the paper with the strange symbols, explaining everything that had happened since I found the forum. "This is insane," he muttered, examining the paper. "These symbols, they're ancient. I've seen something like this before in some classified documents, but this is different." He pulled out his laptop and started working on the code. Hours passed, and the tension in the room was palpable. Finally, Mark looked up, his face pale. "I've cracked part of it," he said, his voice trembling. "It's a warning. There's a group, a shadow organization that's been manipulating world events for decades. They have plans in place for the deaths of key figures, orchestrated disasters, and..." He trailed off, his eyes widening in horror. "There's a list of targets. You're on it." My stomach dropped. "What? Why me?" "You've seen too much. By finding that forum, you stumbled onto something you weren't supposed to see. They know you're a threat." Panic set in. "What do we do?" Mark shook his head. "We need to get this information out there. If people know what's going on, maybe we can stop them. But we have to be careful. They're everywhere." We spent the next few days gathering evidence, hacking into the forum, and downloading as much information as we could. The more we uncovered, the more sinister the plot became. There were plans for global pandemics, political assassinations, and even large-scale terror attacks. The scale of the operation was staggering. One night, as we were working, the power in the motel suddenly went out. The room plunged into darkness, and I heard the sound of footsteps outside. Mark grabbed his laptop and we hid in the bathroom, hoping whoever it was would pass by. But the footsteps stopped right outside our door. There was a loud bang, and the door was kicked open. I held my breath, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I could hear them moving around the room, searching for us. My heart pounded in my chest, and I prayed they wouldn't find us. After what felt like an eternity, they left. We waited another hour before we dared to move. When we finally emerged, the room was trashed. They had taken most of our evidence, but Mark still had some files on his laptop. We knew we had to leave, to disappear before they came back. We drove through the night, avoiding main roads and sticking to back alleys. Our destination was a safe house Mark knew about, a place where we could lay low and regroup. But as we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every car that passed us felt like a threat, every shadow a potential assassin. When we finally reached the safe house, we were exhausted and on edge. The place was a rundown cabin in the middle of nowhere, but it was secure. Mark set up his equipment and we continued our work, hoping to find some way to expose the truth. But the deeper we dug, the more dangerous it became. We started receiving threats, anonymous messages warning us to stop. Mark's phone was hacked, and we knew it was only a matter of time before they found us again. One night, as we were working, we heard a noise outside. I grabbed a flashlight and went to investigate, my heart pounding. As I stepped outside, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching us. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice shaking. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, silent and menacing. I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned to go back inside, but before I could move, the figure lunged at me, knocking me to the ground. I struggled, but it was too strong. I felt a sharp pain in my side, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was tied to a chair in a dark room. Mark was nowhere to be seen. The figure stood in front of me, their face hidden by a hood. "You should have stayed out of it," they said, their voice cold and emotionless. "Now you're going to pay the price." I knew then that my life was in their hands, that there was no escape. They had me, and there was nothing I could do. But I wasn't going to give up. I had to find a way out, to warn the world about the horrors I had uncovered, even if it meant sacrificing myself. I don't know how long I was out, but when I came to, my whole body ached. The room was dimly lit, a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long shadows across the walls. I struggled against the ropes binding me to the chair, but it was no use. The figures stood before me, their face still obscured by a hood. "You really should have left it alone," they said, their voice dripping with malice. "But now, you're in too deep." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, and my words came out as a raspy croak. "What do you want from me?" The figure laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "We want you to understand that some truths are too dangerous to be known. The information you and your friend have gathered, it can't be allowed to see the light of day." "Where's Mark?" I demanded, my voice stronger this time. "What did you do to him?" The figure stepped closer, and I could see their eyes glinting in the dim light. "Mark is no longer your concern. Worry about yourself." Before I could react, the door behind the figure swung open, and two more figures entered the room. They were carrying a metal table, which they placed in front of me. On the table were various instruments, each one more terrifying than the last. Knives, scalpels, pliers, tools of torture. "We have ways of making sure you cooperate," the original figure said, picking up a scalpel and examining it. "But if you tell us where the files are, this can all be over quickly." My mind raced. I knew I couldn't give them what they wanted. The files were our only leverage, our only chance of exposing the truth. But I also knew that I might not survive whatever they had planned for me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Go to hell," I spat, my voice filled with defiance. The figure's eyes narrowed, and they nodded to the others. The next thing I knew, they were pulling out my fingernails one by one. The pain was excruciating, and I screamed until my voice was hoarse. But I refused to give in. I had to stay strong, for Mark, for myself, for the truth. Hours passed, maybe even days. The torture was relentless, and I could feel myself slipping closer to the edge of madness. But I held on, clinging to the hope that somehow Mark had escaped and was working on getting help. Every time they asked about the files, I repeated the same thing. "I don't know." Eventually, they seemed to give up. The original figure leaned in close, their breath hot and foul against my face. "You're stronger than we thought," they said, almost admiringly. "But everyone breaks eventually. We have all the time in the world." They left me alone then, tied to the chair in the dark room. I could feel my strength waning, the pain overwhelming. I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold out. My mind began to drift, and I found myself thinking about the forum, about the old man and his warnings. Suddenly, I heard a noise, a faint tapping, almost like Morse code. I strained to listen, my heart pounding. It was coming from the wall behind me. I realized it was a message, but in my weakened state, I couldn't make it out. Desperation gave me the strength to respond, tapping out the only thing I could think of: help. The tapping stopped, and for a moment, I feared it was just my imagination. But then, a section of the wall slid open, revealing Mark. He looked battered and bruised, but he was alive. "Thank God," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I thought they got you." "They tried," he said, cutting through my restraints with a knife. "But I managed to escape. We need to get out of here now." I nodded, my body trembling as I stood. Together, we made our way through the labyrinthine corridors of the building, avoiding the guards as best we could. My mind was a haze of pain and fear, but I clung to Mark, trusting him to lead us to safety. After what felt like an eternity, we emerged into the night air. The cold wind stung my skin, but I welcomed it. We ran through the forest, not daring to stop until we were far away from that hellish place. We eventually found refuge in an abandoned cabin. It wasn't much, but it was a place to rest and regroup. As we sat by a small fire, Mark pulled out his laptop and showed me the files he had managed to save. They contained everything we needed to expose the organization: names, dates, plans. "We need to get this to the public," Mark said, his voice filled with determination. "But we have to be careful. They're going to come after us with everything they have." I nodded, my mind racing with possibilities. We had to be smart, to find a way to release the information without putting ourselves in even more danger. But for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had a chance, however slim, to bring down the people behind the forum, to stop their twisted plans. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The shadows seemed to move around us, and I knew that we were far from safe. But I also knew that we had to keep fighting, no matter the cost. The truth had to come out, and we were the only ones who could make it happen. The cabin provided a brief respite, but we knew it wouldn't be long before they found us. Mark and I spent the next few days planning our next move, constantly on edge. Every snap of a twig or distant howl of the wind had us jumping out of our skin. The paranoia was suffocating. We decided our best bet was to head to a major city where we could blend into the crowd. New York seemed the obvious choice. It was a risk, but we had no other options. We gathered our things and set out under the cover of darkness, sticking to back roads and avoiding main highways. The journey was harrowing. We had to steal cars to keep moving, switching vehicles every few hours to avoid detection. I could see the stress weighing heavily on Mark. He barely slept, always scanning the horizon for threats. I felt guilty for dragging him into this, but he never once complained. When we finally reached New York, the sheer size of the city was both comforting and terrifying. We found a cheap motel and holed up there, using fake IDs to check in. It was a dump, but it was a roof over our heads. We needed to regroup and figure out our next step. We spent hours in that dingy motel room, poring over the files Mark had saved. The evidence was damning. Detailed plans for political assassinations, orchestrated disasters, and clandestine experiments. The scope of their operation was staggering, and the people involved were powerful beyond imagination. "We need to go public," Mark said one night, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "We need to find a way to get this information to the media." I nodded, but I felt a sinking feeling in my gut. But how? They have eyes everywhere. As soon as we make a move, they'll come after us. Mark sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "We need to find a whistleblower. Someone in the media who's not afraid to take risks." We started making a list of potential journalists, people known for exposing corruption and taking on powerful enemies. It was a long shot, but it was our only hope. We sent out encrypted messages, hoping one of them would take the bait. Days turned into weeks, and the tension was unbearable. We were constantly looking over our shoulders, never staying in one place for too long. Our paranoia grew as we waited for a response. Then finally, we got a reply. The journalist agreed to meet us in a public place, a busy cafe in downtown Manhattan. It was risky, but it was the only way. We arrived early, our nerves on edge. The cafe was crowded, and we took a seat near the back, scanning the room for any signs of trouble. The journalist arrived, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense demeanor. She introduced herself as Sarah and got straight to the point. "You've got 5 minutes to convince me," she said, her eyes piercing. "What do you have?" Mark handed her a flash drive, and she plugged it into her laptop. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the files. This is huge," she whispered, her face pale. "If this is real, it could bring down governments." "It's real," Mark said, his voice steady. "But you need to be careful. They'll come after you too." Sarah nodded, her expression grim. "I know the risks, but the truth needs to come out." We spent the next few hours briefing her on everything we knew. She took meticulous notes, her face growing more serious with each revelation. When we finished, she leaned back in her chair, deep in thought. "I'll need to verify all of this," she said. "But if it checks out, I'll publish the story. I have contacts who can help. But you two need to stay hidden. They'll stop at nothing to silence you." We agreed and made plans to stay in touch. As we left the cafe, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We hurried back to our motel, taking a circuitous route to throw off any potential tales. That night, as we huddled in our room, the fear and tension finally caught up with us. We were exhausted, physically and mentally. Mark fell asleep almost instantly, but I lay awake, my mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. Around midnight, I heard a noise outside our door. My heart skipped a beat, and I reached for the baseball bat we had kept for protection. The door creaked open slowly, and a figure slipped inside. Before I could react, the figure grabbed me, a hand clamping over my mouth. I struggled, but they were too strong. They dragged me into the bathroom, and it was then that I saw their face. It was Sarah. "Shh," she whispered, releasing her grip. "It's me." I had to make sure I wasn't followed. I nodded, my heart still racing. "What's going on?" "I've verified the files," she said, her voice low. "Everything checks out, but they know. They're coming for you. We need to move. Now." I woke Mark, and we gathered our things. Sarah led us out the back, and we slipped into the night. She had a car waiting, and we drove in silence, the weight of our situation pressing down on us. We arrived at a safe house, a nondescript apartment in a quiet neighborhood. Sarah had arranged for us to stay there while she worked on getting the story out. We were on edge, knowing that our enemies were closing in. Days turned into a blur as we waited for Sarah to make her move. The tension was unbearable, and I felt like a caged animal, constantly pacing and looking out the window. Mark tried to stay optimistic, but I could see the fear in his eyes. One night, as we were eating dinner, we heard a noise outside. My heart stopped, and I motioned for Mark to stay quiet. We grabbed our weapons and took up positions near the door. The door burst open, and men in black suits flooded in. We fought back with everything we had, but they overpowered us quickly. I saw Mark go down, a dart in his neck, and then I felt a sharp pain in my side. The last thing I saw before everything went black was Sarah's horrified face as she was dragged away. I woke up in a cold, sterile room. The bright overhead lights made my head pound, and every muscle in my body ached. I tried to move, but I was strapped to a metal table. The memories of the ambush flooded back, and panic surged through me. Mark, Sarah, where were they? Were they even alive? A door creaked open, and the sound of footsteps echoed in the room. I strained to see who it was, but my vision was still blurry. A figure in a lab coat approached, their face obscured by a surgical mask. They held a syringe in their hand, and I could see the liquid inside glinting ominously. "Good to see you're awake," the figure said, their voice muffled. "We've been waiting for this moment." I struggled against the restraints, but it was no use. "Where are my friends? What have you done to them?" The figure ignored my questions and injected the syringe into my arm. A cold numbness spread through my veins, and I felt my body relax against my will. "We need you to be cooperative," they said. "There's so much we need to learn from you." My mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. They were going to experiment on me, just like the files had described. I had to stay strong, had to find a way out, but the drug was making it hard to think, hard to focus. The figure moved to a console on the wall and pressed a few buttons. A screen flickered to life, displaying a live feed of another room. I saw Mark, strapped to a similar table, unconscious but breathing. Relief washed over me. He was alive, at least for now. "We have your friend," the figure said, their voice almost casual. "And the journalist, Sarah. You really should have stayed out of this." "Why?" I managed to croak out. What are you trying to hide? The figure chuckled, a chilling sound that made my skin crawl. There are things in this world that you can't even begin to understand. Forces that operate beyond the reach of governments and laws. You stumbled onto one of our projects, and now we have to clean up the mess. They pressed another button, and the screen switched to show Sarah. She was in a small dark room, her hands tied behind her back. She looked defiant, despite the fear in her eyes. The sight of her gave me a small glimmer of hope. She was a fighter, and so was Mark. Maybe we still had a chance. The figure turned back to me, their eyes cold and calculating. We're going to ask you a few questions, they said, and you're going to answer truthfully. Otherwise, your friends will suffer the consequences. I clenched my teeth, trying to summon the strength to resist. I don't know anything more than you already took from us, I said, my voice weak but determined. The figure sighed and shook their head. That's a shame. We have ways of making you talk. They pressed another button, and I heard a faint buzzing sound. Pain shot through my body, intense and overwhelming. I screamed, my vision going white. When the pain subsided, I was left gasping for breath, tears streaming down my face. Tell us about the files, the figure said. How did you access them? Who else knows about them? I shook my head, the effort costing me dearly. No one else knows, I lied, hoping to buy some time. We found them by accident. Please, just let us go. The figure stared at me for a long moment, their eyes unreadable. We'll see about that, they said finally. But first, let's see how your friend is doing. The screen flickered again, showing Mark as he began to stir. I watched in horror as another figure entered his room, holding a syringe similar to the one used on me. They injected Mark, and he started thrashing against his restraints, his screams echoing through the speakers. Stop, I yelled, my voice cracking. Please, stop hurting him. The figure looked back at me, their expression unchanging. Tell us what we want to know, and this can all end. Desperation clawed at me. I couldn't let them break Mark, but I didn't have the answers they wanted. I told you, I don't know anything else. The figure's eyes narrowed. Very well. Let's see how your journalist friend holds up. The screen switched to Sarah's room. She was still defiant, her eyes blazing with anger. The figure in her room held up a knife, and I felt my heart plummet. No, I whispered. Please, don't hurt her. But the figure showed no mercy. They approached Sarah, the knife glinting in the dim light. I turned away, unable to watch. Her screams pierced the air, a sound that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I knew then that there was no escaping this. They would torture us all until they were satisfied. The only hope was to somehow expose them before it was too late. But how? We were at their mercy, and they were ruthless. Just when I thought all hope was lost, the lights flickered and an alarm started blaring. The figure looked around, confused and angry. What's happening? They demanded, but no one answered. The door to my room burst open, and armed men in tactical gear stormed in. They quickly subdued the figure and released my restraints. I was too weak to move, but relief flooded through me. The memories of the ambush flooded back, and panic surged through me. Mark, Sarah, where were they? Were they even alive? A door creaked open, and the sound of footsteps echoed in the room. I strained to see who it was, but my vision was still blurry. A figure in a lab coat approached, their face obscured by a surgical mask. They held a syringe in their hand, and I could see the liquid inside glinting ominously. "Good to see you're awake," the figure said, their voice muffled. "We've been waiting for this moment." I struggled against the restraints, but it was no use. "Where are my friends? What have you done to them?" The figure ignored my questions and injected the syringe into my arm. A cold numbness spread through my veins, and I felt my body relax against my will. "We need you to be cooperative," they said. "There's so much we need to learn from you." My mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. They were going to experiment on me, just like the files had described. I had to stay strong, had to find a way out, but the drug was making it hard to think, hard to focus. The figure moved to a console on the wall and pressed a few buttons. A screen flickered to life, displaying a live feed of another room. I saw Mark, strapped to a similar table, unconscious but breathing. Relief washed over me. He was alive, at least for now. "We have your friend," the figure said, their voice almost casual. "And the journalist, Sarah. You really should have stayed out of this." "Why?" I managed to croak out. "What are you trying to hide?" The figure chuckled, a chilling sound that made my skin crawl. "There are things in this world that you can't even begin to understand. Forces that operate beyond the reach of governments and laws. You stumbled onto one of our projects, and now we have to clean up the mess." They pressed another button, and the screen switched to show Sarah. She was in a small, dark room, her hands tied behind her back. She looked defiant, despite the fear in her eyes. The sight of her gave me a small glimmer of hope. She was a fighter, and so was Mark. Maybe we still had a chance. The figure turned back to me, their eyes cold and calculating. "We're going to ask you a few questions," they said, "and you're going to answer truthfully. Otherwise, your friends will suffer the consequences." I clenched my teeth, trying to summon the strength to resist. "I don't know anything more than you already took from us," I said, my voice weak but determined. The figure sighed and shook their head. "That's a shame. We have ways of making you talk." They pressed another button, and I heard a faint buzzing sound. Pain shot through my body, intense and overwhelming. I screamed, my vision going white. When the pain subsided, I was left gasping for breath, tears streaming down my face. "Tell us about the files," the figure said. "How did you access them? Who else knows about them?" I shook my head, the effort costing me dearly. "No one else knows," I lied, hoping to buy some time. "We found them by accident. Please, just let us go." The figure stared at me for a long moment, their eyes unreadable. "We'll see about that," they said finally. "But first, let's see how your friend is doing." The screen flickered again, showing Mark as he began to stir. I watched in horror as another figure entered his room, holding a syringe similar to the one used on me. They injected Mark, and he started thrashing against his restraints, his screams echoing through the speakers. "Stop!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "Please stop hurting him." The figure looked back at me, their expression unchanging. "Tell us what we want to know, and this can all end." Desperation clawed at me. I couldn't let them break Mark, but I didn't have the answers they wanted. "I told you, I don't know anything else." The figure's eyes narrowed. "Very well. Let's see how your journalist friend holds up." The screen switched to Sarah's room. She was still defiant, her eyes blazing with anger. The figure in her room held up a knife, and I felt my heart plummet. "No," I whispered. "Please, don't hurt her." But the figure showed no mercy. They approached Sarah, the knife glinting in the dim light. I turned away, unable to watch. Her screams pierced the air, a sound that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I knew then that there was no escaping this. They would torture us all until they were satisfied. The only hope was to somehow expose them before it was too late. But how? We were at their mercy, and they were ruthless. Just when I thought all hope was lost, the lights flickered and an alarm started blaring. The figure looked around, confused and angry. "What's happening?" they demanded, but no one answered. The door to my room burst open, and armed men in tactical gear stormed in. They quickly subdued the figure and released my restraints. I was too weak to move, but relief flooded through me. I was hired on a dark web job to record a strange ritual in my hometown near woods. I never thought I'd end up in this situation, and honestly, if I had the chance, I'd probably slap my past self for being so damn naive. But here I am, alive and trembling, trying to piece together what the hell just happened. This all started a few weeks ago, when I was struggling to make ends meet and thought I'd try my luck on the dark web. I've always been a bit of a tech geek, and I knew my way around Tor and some of the more obscure corners of the internet. I'd heard rumors about people finding odd jobs on there, some harmless, some not so much. I figured, what's the harm in looking? After all, desperate times call for desperate measures. That's when I stumbled upon an offer that seemed almost too good to be true. It was a simple gig. Head to a specific location in my hometown, record a ritual, and get paid $10,000. The job was posted by someone with the username Raven Black, and their instructions were cryptic but clear. The ritual was to take place at midnight in the woods just outside of town, a place I knew well from my childhood, despite every instinct telling me to stay far away from it. The money was too tempting. I replied to the post, and within hours, I got a response. They sent me an encrypted message with more details, the exact location, the time, and a warning not to interact with anyone I saw there. My job was simply to record and leave. I spent the next few days convincing myself it would be fine. I bought a high-quality camera, a couple of power banks, and some camping gear to blend in, just in case. I didn't tell anyone what I was up to, not even my closest friends. How could I explain that I was about to record some bizarre ritual in the woods for a bunch of strangers on the dark web? The night finally came, and I headed out to the woods. The air was thick with humidity, and the forest was eerily quiet. I found the location easily enough. It was a clearing I remembered from my youth, surrounded by tall, ancient trees that seemed to swallow the moonlight. I set up my camera in a hidden spot and waited. Midnight came and went, and for a while, nothing happened. I started to think it was a prank or a wild goose chase, but then I heard footsteps. A group of hooded figures emerged from the shadows, their faces hidden. They moved in eerie synchronization, setting up candles in a circle and placing strange objects around the clearing. I started recording, my heart pounding. The figures began chanting in a language I couldn't understand. It was low and guttural, sending chills down my spine. I kept the camera focused, trying to capture every detail. Then they brought out the victim. It was a young woman, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with terror. My stomach churned as I realized this was far worse than I'd imagined. They laid her in the center of the circle and continued their chants, the volume increasing. I wanted to look away, to run, but I was frozen in place, unable to tear my eyes from the scene unfolding before me. One of the figures stepped forward, holding a gleaming knife. He raised it high, and before I could react, he plunged it into her chest. The scream that tore through the clearing was unlike anything I had ever heard. It was raw, primal, and filled with unimaginable pain. Blood gushed from the wound, and the chanting reached a fever pitch. I could feel bile rising in my throat, but I forced myself to keep recording. The figures began to draw symbols in the blood, their hands moving with practiced precision. The woman's body convulsed, her screams fading into gurgles. I felt like I was in a nightmare, unable to wake up. Suddenly, one of the figures turned and looked directly at me. I don't know how he saw me in the darkness, but his eyes locked onto mine. They were black, completely devoid of any emotion. I panicked, grabbing my camera and stumbling backward. The chanting stopped abruptly, and I heard them moving towards me. I bolted, running blindly through the woods, branches whipping at my face. I didn't stop until I reached my car, gasping for breath and covered in scratches. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. I couldn't go to the police. They'd never believe me. And even if they did, what proof did I have that wouldn't get me into trouble for being there in the first place? I decided to upload the footage as instructed, hoping that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. As soon as I hit send, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it was. "Good job," a voice said. It was deep and distorted, probably through a voice changer. "You'll get your payment soon. But remember, you saw nothing. You were never there." The line went dead, and I was left sitting in the dark, my mind reeling. What had I gotten myself into? And more importantly, what had I just witnessed? I tried to go about my life as usual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of my vision, and I started getting strange messages on my phone, always from unknown numbers. They were vague threats, reminding me to keep my mouth shut. Then one night, I came home to find a package on my doorstep. There was no return address, but I knew it was from them. Inside was a USB drive and a note. "For your next job." I didn't want to open it, but I knew I had no choice. I plugged it into my computer, and a video started playing. It was the same clearing, the same ritual, but this time, the victim was someone I recognized. It was my best friend, Jake. The video cut off abruptly, and a new message appeared on the screen. "You have 48 hours. Do not fail us." I felt my blood run cold. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was a nightmare I couldn't escape. I had to find Jake and stop whatever was going to happen. But deep down, I knew it was already too late. I didn't sleep at all that night. My mind was racing, filled with images of the ritual, the blood, and Jake's terrified face on that video. I kept replaying every detail, every sound, trying to figure out my next move. The rational part of me wanted to call the cops, but the memory of that voice on the phone and the vague threats kept me frozen. At dawn, I decided to go to Jake's place. I had to warn him, even if I didn't have a concrete plan. When I arrived, the door was ajar. My heart sank. Jake was the kind of guy who always locked up, so this was definitely wrong. I pushed the door open slowly, calling his name. The silence inside was thick and oppressive. I found him in his living room, unconscious but alive. He was tied to a chair, gagged, with bruises on his face. Panic surged through me as I rushed to untie him. His eyes fluttered open, filled with fear and confusion. "Jake, it's me. It's okay. I'm getting you out of here," I whispered urgently, my hands shaking as I worked on the knots. He mumbled something through the gag, his eyes wide with desperation. I finally got him free, and he slumped forward, his body weak from the ordeal. "They're coming back," he gasped. "We have to go, now." I helped him to his feet, and we stumbled out of the house and into my car. As I sped away, Jake started to tell me what had happened. He'd been grabbed the night before by a group of masked men. They didn't say much, just that they needed him for a special event. They knew everything about me, man. My routines, where I go, who I hang out with. They even mentioned you, Jake said, his voice trembling. They said you were involved. I felt a lump in my throat. Jake, I had no idea. I got involved with some dark web job, and it spiraled out of control. They made me record this ritual, and now they're targeting you. We need to find a way to stop them. We drove aimlessly for hours, trying to come up with a plan. Every idea seemed worse than the last. We couldn't go to the police, and we had no way of knowing who these people were or what they wanted. Eventually, we decided to lay low at an old abandoned cabin Jake's family owned, deep in the woods. It was isolated, and we hoped it would buy us some time. As we settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent my heart racing. Jake was in bad shape, both physically and mentally, and I knew we couldn't stay hidden forever. That night, we heard footsteps outside the cabin. We both froze, our eyes locked in mutual terror. The footsteps grew closer, and then there was a loud knock on the door. "Open up," a voice commanded. It was the same distorted voice from the phone call. We didn't move, hoping they'd go away. But then the door burst open and 3 hooded figures stormed in. They grabbed us before we could react, dragging us outside into the cold night. I struggled against their grip, but it was useless. They were too strong. They dragged us to a clearing where a group of people stood waiting. The leader stepped forward, pulling back his hood. His face was pale and gaunt, eyes sunken and devoid of life. "You've been chosen," he said, his voice cold and emotionless. "You have witnessed the ritual. Now you must become part of it." Before I could process his words, they forced us to our knees. The leader began chanting, and the others joined in. It was the same guttural language from before, and it filled me with a deep sense of dread. Jake was trembling beside me, tears streaming down his face. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him we'd find a way out, but I knew it was a lie. The leader raised a ceremonial dagger, and I knew what was coming. Just as he was about to strike, a blinding light filled the clearing. The chanting stopped abruptly, and the hooded figures scattered, shielding their eyes. A helicopter hovered overhead, its spotlight fixed on us. I felt a rush of relief, thinking we were saved, but the leader didn't flee. Instead, he turned to us, his eyes burning with rage. "You will not escape your fate," he snarled. He lunged at Jake, and I watched in horror as the dagger plunged into his chest. Jake's scream echoed in the night, and I felt a surge of adrenaline. I managed to break free from my captor's grip and ran towards the light. I was tackled to the ground, but the helicopter's spotlight followed me, and I heard shouts from above. "Get down, we're here to help." Armed men in tactical gear descended from the helicopter, quickly subduing the remaining cultists. I was pulled to my feet, dazed and disoriented. One of the rescuers checked me over while another went to Jake, but it was too late. Jake lay motionless, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. I felt a wave of grief and guilt wash over me. This was my fault. I had dragged him into this nightmare, and now he was gone. The leader and several cultists were arrested, but many escaped into the woods. As I was led away, the rescuer explained that they had been tracking this cult for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. They had intercepted the dark web messages and had been monitoring the situation closely. I was taken to a hospital for treatment and questioning. The authorities were thorough, but there were still so many unanswered questions. The cult's motives, their origins, and how many members were still out there, all remained a mystery. I'm trying to move on, but the events of that night haunt me. I can't shake the feeling that it's not over, that the cult is still out there, watching and waiting. Every shadow, every unexpected noise sends me into a panic. I've changed my phone number, moved to a different city, and cut ties with anyone who might connect me to the past. But deep down, I know it's only a matter of time before they find me again. And next time, I might not be so lucky. After Jake's funeral, I tried to go back to a semblance of normal life, but the nightmares followed me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, heard his screams. The authorities told me they were still investigating the cult, but I knew they were just trying to keep me calm. The truth was, they had no idea how deep this thing went, and neither did I. A few weeks passed. In a blur, I moved to a new city, got a new job, and tried to disappear into the crowd. But the sense of being watched never left me. I'd catch glimpses of familiar hooded figures in the shadows, always disappearing before I could be sure. Paranoia became my constant companion. Then one night, I found another package on my doorstep. My blood ran cold as I saw the now familiar lack of a return address. Inside was another USB drive. My hands trembled as I plugged it into my laptop, dreading what I might see. The video was short, only a few seconds long, but it was enough to make my blood freeze. It showed a room, dimly lit by flickering candles. On the floor was a symbol I recognized from the ritual site, drawn in what looked like blood. The camera panned to a figure, tied to a chair in the center of the room. My heart nearly stopped when I saw who it was. My little sister, Emily. The screen went black, and a message appeared. Complete the ritual, or she dies. You have 72 hours. I collapsed into my chair, my mind spinning. Emily had nothing to do with this. She was only 14, an innocent kid. I knew I had no choice. I had to go back, but I couldn't do it alone. I reached out to an old friend, Sarah. She was a reporter, the kind who lived for uncovering the truth, no matter how dangerous. I told her everything, from the dark web job to Jake's death, and now Emily's kidnapping. She agreed to help, driven by both curiosity and a sense of justice. We spent the next day gathering what little information we could about the cult. Sarah used her connections to dig up old police reports and news articles. We found mentions of disappearances and strange rituals going back decades, all centered around my hometown. The cult seemed to have roots that ran deep, hidden in plain sight. As the deadline approached, we prepared to head back to the woods. I felt like I was walking into my own execution, but there was no other choice. Emily's life depended on it. We arrived at the clearing just before midnight. The forest was unnervingly quiet, as if it too were holding its breath. We set up our cameras, hoping to gather evidence that could finally bring these people down. Sarah had managed to get a satellite phone, ensuring we had a direct line to the authorities if things went south. The cultists emerged from the shadows, just as they had before. This time, I recognized some of the faces, including the leader. They brought Emily out, bound and gagged, her eyes filled with terror. It took every ounce of willpower to stay hidden and not rush to her. The leader began the ritual, chanting in that same guttural language. The others joined in, their voices melding into a horrifying symphony. I felt my resolve wavering, the urge to save Emily overpowering my sense of caution. Sarah whispered urgently, "We need to get closer. We need solid evidence." We moved silently, inching closer to the ritual site. The air was thick with the scent of burning herbs and something metallic. Blood, probably. The leader raised his hands, and the chanting grew louder. I saw the knife gleaming in his hand, and my heart pounded in my chest. Suddenly, the chanting stopped. The leader turned and looked directly at us. "You think you can stop us?" he snarled. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Before we could react, several cultists grabbed us, dragging us into the circle. The leader's eyes bore into mine, filled with a malevolent glee. "You will complete the ritual, or she dies," he hissed. They forced me to my knees beside Emily. The leader handed me the knife, its blade still wet with blood from previous rituals. "Do it," he commanded. "Prove your loyalty, and we might let her live." My hands shook as I took the knife. Emily's eyes were wide with fear, tears streaming down her face. I knew I couldn't go through with it, but if I refused, they'd kill her and me. Sarah tried to intervene, shouting that the authorities were on their way, but the leader just laughed. "By the time they get here, it will be too late," he sneered. In a split-second decision, I lunged at the leader with the knife. Chaos erupted. The cultists attacked, and I fought back with everything I had. Sarah managed to free Emily, and together we tried to make our escape. We ran blindly through the woods, the sounds of pursuit close behind. I could hear Emily's sobs and Sarah's frantic breathing. My mind was a whirl of fear and adrenaline. Then I tripped over something and went sprawling. I looked back and saw the leader standing over me, his face twisted in rage. "You think you can defy us?" he spat. Before he could strike, a gunshot rang out. The leader fell, clutching his chest. I looked up to see Sarah holding a small pistol, her hand steady. "We need to go, now!" she shouted. We didn't stop running until we reached the main road. There, we flagged down a passing car, the driver thankfully willing to help. We piled in, gasping for breath, and sped away from the nightmare in the woods. The authorities arrived later, but most of the cultists had vanished, leaving only the leader's body and a few stragglers behind. They assured us they'd continue the investigation, but I knew the cult was far from finished. Emily was safe, but the trauma of that night would haunt us forever. Sarah's footage helped expose the cult's existence, but their roots were too deep to eradicate completely. I've changed my identity, moved across the country, and tried to rebuild my life. But the shadows are always there, lurking, waiting. The cult's reach is long, and I know they're not done with me yet. Every night, I sleep with one eye open, knowing that one day they'll come for me again. And when they do, I'll be ready. It's been 6 months since the night in the woods, but I still feel like I'm living in a nightmare. Emily and I have relocated to a small town far from our hometown, trying to stay under the radar. We've both changed our names, our appearances, and our routines. Sarah moved on to a new assignment, but she still checks in occasionally. Despite all this, the sense of dread lingers, like a dark cloud hanging over us. Emily hasn't spoken much since that night. She's in therapy, but the trauma runs deep. I hear her crying sometimes, muffling her sobs with her pillow. It breaks my heart, and I hate myself for dragging her into this. Every day, I live with the fear that the cult will find us, that they'll drag us back into that hell. One evening, I came home to find Emily gone. My heart sank, and panic set in. I searched the house, calling her name, but there was no response. Then I noticed a piece of paper on the kitchen table. It was a note, written in Emily's shaky handwriting. "They found us. Don't come looking for me. I love you." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. They had taken her. Again. The rage and despair threatened to overwhelm me, but I couldn't afford to break down. I had to find her. I contacted Sarah, explaining the situation. She was furious that the cult had managed to find us, but she promised to help. We decided to return to the hometown, the only place we had ever encountered the cult directly. It felt like walking into the lion's den, but we had no choice. We arrived at night, the town shrouded in darkness and silence. Memories of the past came flooding back, but I pushed them aside. We needed to focus. We headed straight to the woods, the place where it had all begun. The forest was as eerie as I remembered, the trees towering ominously, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. We moved cautiously, the only sounds being our footsteps and the distant hoot of an owl. Every rustle of leaves made my heart race, expecting to see hooded figures emerge from the shadows. After what felt like hours, we reached the clearing. It was empty, but the remnants of past rituals were still there. Scorched ground, melted candle wax, and faint, dark stains. I scanned the area, looking for any sign of Emily, any clue as to where they might have taken her. Then Sarah found something. A small wooden box, partially buried under a pile of leaves. Inside was a piece of paper, covered in strange symbols and a map. It seemed to lead deeper into the woods, to a location we hadn't explored before. "This has to be it," Sarah whispered, her voice tense. "They must have taken her here." We followed the map, the path winding through the thick underbrush. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It felt like the forest itself was trying to keep us out, the trees closing in around us. Eventually, we reached an old abandoned cabin, its windows dark, and its door hanging ajar. The air was thick with the scent of decay. And something else, something metallic. I felt a chill run down my spine. We approached cautiously, weapons at the ready. Sarah had brought her pistol, and I had a hunting knife I had found in my father's old tools. Inside, the cabin was even more decrepit, the floorboards creaking under our weight. We moved from room to room, the darkness pressing in around us. In the basement, we found them. Emily was tied to a chair, her face pale and streaked with tears. The cultists surrounded her, their faces hidden by their hoods. The leader, the same one from before, stood in the center, chanting in that same guttural language. Before they could react, Sarah fired a warning shot. "Step away from her," she shouted, her voice echoing in the small space. The leader turned to face us, his eyes filled with a cold, calculating malice. "You are too late," he said, his voice low and menacing. "The ritual is already in motion. She belongs to us now." I lunged forward, my knife ready, but two cultists grabbed me, their grips like iron. Sarah fired again, hitting one of them, but the others quickly overpowered her, disarming her and pinning her to the ground. The leader approached me, his face inches from mine. "You cannot stop us," he hissed. "The darkness has claimed her." Desperation gave me strength. I broke free from my captors and charged at the leader, my knife plunging into his side. He let out a guttural scream, and the room erupted into chaos. Sarah managed to break free and grab her pistol, firing at the remaining cultists. In the confusion, I cut Emily's bonds and pulled her to her feet. "We need to go, now!" I shouted, dragging her towards the stairs. We fought our way out of the cabin, the sounds of the battle fading behind us. We ran through the woods, not stopping until we reached the car. Emily was barely conscious, her body trembling from the shock. I held her close, whispering that it was over, that she was safe now. But as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly over. The cult was still out there, their reach long, and their determination unyielding. They would come for us again. Of that I was certain. For now, we had escaped, but I knew the darkness would follow us. And next time, it might not be so merciful. We didn't stop driving until dawn. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see hooded figures following us. Emily was slumped against the passenger seat, exhausted but alive. Sarah was in the back, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon for any signs of pursuit. We needed a plan, and we needed it fast. We found a motel on the outskirts of a small town, far from anyone we knew. I paid in cash, using a fake name, and we huddled in the tiny room, trying to catch our breath and figure out our next move. Emily was still in shock, barely speaking. I wanted to comfort her, but I knew words wouldn't be enough. Sarah and I sat at the small table, whispering about our options. "We need to disappear, completely," she said. "New identities, new lives. We can't keep running forever." "I know," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. "But how? They always seem to find us." Sarah leaned in closer, her expression grim. "I have a contact, someone who deals in high-level disappearances. It won't be cheap, but it's our best shot." We agreed to meet Sarah's contact later that night. I spent the day trying to keep Emily calm, reassuring her that we were safe now. She nodded, but the fear in her eyes never faded. I couldn't blame her. We'd been through too much to trust anything would ever be safe again. As night fell, we drove to a secluded warehouse on the edge of the town. The place was run down, graffiti-covered walls and broken windows, giving it an eerie vibe. Sarah knocked on a side door in a specific pattern, and it creaked open to reveal a man in his 40s, dressed in a worn leather jacket. "This is David," Sarah said, introducing us. "He's the best at what he does." David nodded, sizing us up. "I've heard about your situation," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I can help, but it's going to cost you. And once you disappear, there's no going back. You'll be ghosts." I agreed without hesitation. We pooled our resources, giving David everything we had. He handed us new IDs, complete with background histories and everything we'd need to start over. "You have to leave tonight," he said. "Burn any trace of your old lives. They can't find what doesn't exist." We spent the next few hours destroying our old documents, burning anything that could link us to our past. It felt like erasing our very existence, but it was a necessary sacrifice. By the time we finished, dawn was breaking again, and we were exhausted but determined. David gave us the keys to a nondescript car and an address to a safe house in another state. Stick to back roads, avoid cameras, and don't trust anyone, he warned. Good luck. We drove in silence, the weight of our decision pressing down on us. The journey was long and tense, every passing car a potential threat. Emily clung to me, her fear palpable. Sarah kept her hand on her gun, ready for anything. As we approached the safe house, a small isolated cabin deep in the woods, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could finally be free. We settled in, the cabin's rustic charm a stark contrast to the chaos we'd left behind. Days turned into weeks, and for a while, it seemed like we might actually have a chance at a normal life. Emily started to open up, her laughter slowly returning. Sarah and I began to relax, letting our guard down ever so slightly. But then, one night, the nightmares returned. I woke up in a cold sweat, the echo of the leader's voice ringing in my ears. I crept to the window, peering into the darkness, and that's when I saw it. A figure, standing at the edge of the woods, watching the cabin. My heart pounded as I grabbed my knife, waking Sarah and Emily. We need to go, now, I whispered urgently. They didn't question me, the fear in my voice enough to spur them into action. We packed what little we had and slipped out the back door, moving silently through the forest. I glanced back, but the figure was gone. My paranoia had been justified. They'd found us again. We reached a nearby town by dawn, blending into the early morning crowd. We found another motel, paying in cash, and huddled in the room, trying to come up with a new plan. Sarah contacted David, explaining what had happened. He promised to look into it, but his resources were limited. Days passed, each one filled with a sense of impending doom. Then one evening, Sarah received a message from David. "Meet me at the old train yard," it read. "I have information." We arrived at the train yard just after sunset. The place was abandoned, rusting train cars casting long shadows in the fading light. David was waiting for us, his expression grim. "They're not just a cult," he said. "They're part of something much bigger, something ancient. They have connections everywhere, and they won't stop until they get what they want." "What do they want?" I asked, dreading the answer. "You," David replied. "Your bloodline. You're part of some prophecy, something they believe will bring them power." I felt the ground shift beneath me. This wasn't just about a ritual or a dark web job. This was about my family, my history. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. David handed us new documents, new identities. "You need to go off the grid completely. I've arranged for transport to a safe location, somewhere they'll never find you. But you have to leave now." We didn't hesitate. We followed David to a waiting truck, climbing into the back. As we drove away, I glanced back at the train yard, a sense of finality settling over me. This was it, our last chance. The journey was long and arduous, taking us through back roads and remote areas. We arrived at a secluded compound deep in the mountains, far from any civilization. It was secure, fortified, and hidden from the world. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. We settled into our new life, always vigilant, but slowly allowing ourselves to believe we might be safe. Emily started to heal, her laughter returning. Sarah and I grew closer, bonded by our shared ordeal. But the shadows never completely disappeared. Every rustle of leaves, every unexpected sound kept us on edge. We knew the cult was still out there, waiting, watching. One night, as I sat on the porch, Gazing at the stars, I felt a presence. I turned, my heart racing, but there was nothing, just the wind whispering through the trees. I knew then that we could never truly escape. The cult's reach was long, their determination unwavering, but we were fighters, survivors. We'd faced the darkness and lived to tell the tale. And as long as we had each other, we'd keep fighting. We'd stay one step ahead, always looking over our shoulders, but never giving up. Because in the end, it wasn't just about survival. It was about reclaiming our lives, our identities, our future. And we'd do whatever it took to keep the darkness at bay. I played crazy game on the dark web called Find the Treasure. We found a getaway that leads to another dimension. Alright, Reddit. This is something I never thought I'd share, but here we are. I've been up for 3 days straight, and I can't stop replaying everything in my head. I don't know if putting this out there will help, but maybe someone can offer an explanation, or at least some closure. Or maybe it's just a warning. It started 2 weeks ago. I've always been fascinated by the dark web, like some twisted curiosity. My friend Jake and I would occasionally explore, but we knew to stay away from the really shady stuff. Or so we thought. One night, after a few too many beers, Jake came across a game called Find the Treasure. The instructions were simple. Solve a series of riddles, follow the clues, and you'd find a treasure. The reward was rumored to be massive, but no one ever said what it was exactly. It sounded dumb at first, but we were bored and a little drunk, so we decided to give it a shot. The first few clues were easy, just typical internet scavenger hunt stuff. But then, the game started getting weird. We had to decrypt messages, find hidden websites, and even break into some low security systems. It was challenging, but nothing we couldn't handle. It almost felt like an escape room, but online. Then we got to the final clue. It led us to a website with a countdown timer and a set of coordinates. The timer was counting down from 72 hours, and the coordinates pointed to an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the town. We laughed it off as a joke at first, but the more we thought about it, the more we wanted to see it through. Jake was always up for an adventure, and I didn't want to chicken out. So we decided to go. We packed some flashlights, a couple of knives just in case, and a few snacks. The warehouse was about an hour's drive, and as we got closer, the area became more and more deserted. It was the kind of place you see in horror movies, where you know something bad is going to happen. The building itself was massive, covered in graffiti, and looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The windows were all broken, and the doors were barely hanging on their hinges. We parked a little way off and walked the rest of the distance. As we approached, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Jake joked about ghosts and serial killers, but I could tell he was uneasy too. The front door was locked, but we found a side entrance that was pried open. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the only light came from our flashlights. We followed the instructions from the website, making our way through a series of corridors and rooms. Everything was eerily quiet, except for our footsteps echoing off the walls. Eventually, we reached a large open space that must have been the main warehouse floor. In the center was a trapdoor, just like the final clue had described. Jake and I exchanged nervous glances. This was it. The end of our stupid game. We pried the door open, and there was a ladder leading down into the darkness. Jake went first, and I followed, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. The ladder seemed to go on forever, but finally, we reached the bottom. We found ourselves in a small, dimly lit room with concrete walls. There was a table in the center with a laptop on it, and a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The laptop screen displayed a single word: "Congratulations." Jake couldn't help but laugh. "All this for a freaking laptop?" he said. But then he noticed something. There was a USB drive plugged into the laptop with a note attached to it. The note read, "Insert to win your prize." Against my better judgment, Jake plugged the USB drive into the laptop. The screen flickered, and then a video started playing. It showed a series of disturbing images, people being tortured, mutilated bodies, and things I can't even begin to describe. I felt sick to my stomach, but Jake seemed entranced. He kept watching, even as the images got worse. Then the video cut to live footage. It was us, standing in that very room. The camera angle was from the corner of the ceiling, and I could see myself staring at the screen with horror. Suddenly, the laptop shut off, and the light bulb above us flickered and went out. We were plunged into complete darkness. Panic set in. I could hear Jake breathing heavily beside me. I fumbled for my flashlight and turned it on, but the beam seemed weaker than before. We had to get out of there. We scrambled back up the ladder, but when we reached the top, the trapdoor was closed. We hadn't closed it behind us. We were trapped. Jake started pounding on the door, yelling for help, but there was no response. I tried to stay calm, thinking maybe it was just a prank, that someone would come and let us out. But deep down, I knew something was very, very wrong. Hours passed, or maybe it was just minutes. It was hard to tell. We were both exhausted, sitting on the cold concrete floor, trying to figure out what to do. Then we heard it, a faint scraping sound coming from the darkness below. I shone my flashlight down the ladder, but there was nothing there. The sound got louder, closer. It was like nails on a chalkboard, and it was driving me insane. Suddenly, Jake screamed. He was pointing at the far corner of the room, where the light from my flashlight barely reached. There was something there, something moving. I swung the beam over, but whatever it was had vanished. Jake was shaking, muttering to himself. He kept saying, "We shouldn't have come here. We shouldn't have played the game." And then the whispering started. Voices all around us, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. They were angry, accusing. I felt a cold hand brush against my arm, but when I turned, there was no one there. Jake was losing it, banging his head against the wall, trying to make the voices stop. Out of nowhere, the laptop turned back on, casting an eerie glow in the room. The screen showed a new message. "Welcome to your new home." I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just a game anymore. This was something far more sinister. We had opened a door to another dimension, a place of darkness and despair, and now we were trapped here with no way out. Jake snapped. He grabbed the laptop and smashed it against the wall, screaming in frustration. But the voices didn't stop. The scratching got louder, and I knew, deep down, that we were never getting out of there alive. I don't know how much time passed before I finally blacked out. When I woke up, I was back in my apartment, lying on the floor. Jake was gone. The laptop was gone. Everything was just normal. But I knew it wasn't over. I could still hear the whispers, feel the cold touch of invisible hands. And then I saw it. The USB drive, sitting on my desk with a new note attached. To be continued. I haven't slept since. I don't know where Jake is, or if he's even still alive. All I know is that I'm not alone. They're watching, waiting, and I'm terrified of what's going to happen next. I spent the next few days in a haze, unable to think about anything except that night. I called Jake's phone countless times, but it went straight to voicemail. His social media accounts were inactive, and no one had seen or heard from him. It was like he had vanished into thin air. I tried to convince myself it was just a bad dream, but the USB drive sitting on my desk was a grim reminder that it was all too real. I knew I had to do something. The whispers were getting louder, more insistent, and every time I touched the USB drive, I felt a jolt of electricity course through my body. I was scared out of my mind, but I had to find out what happened to Jake. I plugged the USB drive into my computer, and a new file appeared on the screen. It was an audio file, simply labeled "Listen." With shaking hands, I clicked play. The recording started with a series of beeps and static. Then a distorted voice began to speak. It was deep, guttural, and filled with malice. "Welcome back," it said. "You have unlocked the first gate. To find your friend and uncover the truth, you must continue the game." The voice gave me another set of coordinates and a time. Midnight, 3 days from now. The coordinates pointed to an old abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town. I knew the place. It had a dark history, full of rumors about cruel experiments and ghost sightings. It was the last place I wanted to go, but I didn't have a choice. Jake's life depended on it. The days leading up to the deadline were torture. The whispers never stopped, and I felt like I was constantly being watched. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just out of sight. I barely ate, barely slept. I was consumed by fear and dread. Finally, the night arrived. I packed a flashlight, a crowbar, and my knife. I also brought a small camera, thinking I might need some proof of whatever I was about to encounter. The drive to the asylum was nerve-wracking, and by the time I arrived, I was drenched in sweat. The building loomed before me, dark and foreboding, its windows like black eyes staring into my soul. I parked a little way off and made my way to the entrance. The front gate was padlocked, but I managed to squeeze through a gap in the fence. The asylum grounds were overgrown and littered with debris. Every step I took seemed to echo in the stillness, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. I reached the main door, which was hanging off its hinges. Inside, the place was a maze of crumbling corridors and empty rooms. I followed the coordinates, checking my phone every few minutes to make sure I was on the right track. The deeper I went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The walls seemed to close in on me, and the temperature dropped, making my breath visible in the flashlight beam. Eventually, I found myself in front of a heavy metal door, marked with a red X. This was it. I took a deep breath, gripped the crowbar tightly, and pried the door open. It swung inward with a loud creak, revealing a flight of stairs leading down into darkness. I descended slowly, each step echoing in the silence. At the bottom, I found another room, similar to the one in the warehouse. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a sickly yellow glow over the space. In the center of the room was a chair, and in the chair was Jake. He was tied up, his head slumped forward. His clothes were torn, and he looked like he hadn't eaten in days. I rushed over to him, shaking him awake. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, I saw recognition and relief, but then his expression changed to one of sheer terror. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's too late. They're here." Before I could respond, the room was filled with a high-pitched screeching sound. I spun around, shining my flashlight into the darkness. Shadows moved, coalescing into forms that were vaguely human, but distorted and twisted. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and their mouths were stretched into grotesque smiles. They advanced slowly, surrounding us. I tried to cut Jake's bindings with my knife, but my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold the blade. The shadows drew closer, their whispers filling my head, drowning out my thoughts. Suddenly, the light bulb exploded, plunging us into complete darkness. I felt cold hands grabbing me, pulling me away from Jake. I screamed, fought, but it was no use. The last thing I heard before everything went black was Jake's voice, a desperate plea. "Find the key. It's the only way." When I came to, I was outside the asylum, lying in the grass. My flashlight and knife were gone, but the camera was still strapped to my chest. I had no idea how I had gotten there, or what had happened to Jake. I checked the camera, hoping for some clue, but the memory card was corrupted. All the footage was gone. I stumbled back to my car, dazed and terrified. I couldn't go to the police. They would never believe me. Hell, I could barely believe it myself, but I knew I couldn't stop. Jake was still out there somewhere, and I had to find him. As I drove home, I replayed his last words over and over in my head. Find the key. I didn't know what it meant, but it was the only lead I had. I just hoped I could figure it out before it was too late for both of us. I spent the next few days in a fog, trying to piece together what had happened at the asylum. The whispers in my head had become a constant presence, a reminder that I was no longer alone. I barely ate or slept, haunted by visions of Jake and those twisted, shadowy figures. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their glowing eyes and heard their guttural voices. Jake's words echoed in my mind, "Find the key." But what key? Where was I supposed to look? I scoured the internet for any clues, diving deeper into the dark web than ever before. I found forums discussing similar experiences, but no one had any concrete answers. It felt like I was chasing ghosts. One night, as I was scrolling through yet another forum, I received a message from an anonymous user. The message was short and cryptic. "You seek the key. Follow the path of shadows." Attached was a link to a live stream. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I clicked the link, and the screen filled with a live feed of a dark, abandoned building. The camera was shaky, and the quality was poor, but I could make out the faint outlines of furniture and debris. Then a figure appeared on the screen, cloaked in darkness. They wore a mask, featureless and white, and their voice was distorted. "Welcome," the figure said. "You have entered the game. To find the key, you must prove yourself worthy. Follow the path, and you will find what you seek. Fail, and you'll be lost. Forever." The screen went black, and a new set of coordinates appeared, along with the time, midnight, 3 days from now. The coordinates pointed to an old, decrepit mansion on the outskirts of the town. I knew the place. It was rumored to be haunted, with a history of murders and disappearances. I didn't have a choice. I had to go. I packed a bag with the essentials: flashlight, crowbar, knife, and camera. I also brought a small journal to document anything I found. The whispers were growing louder, more insistent, and I knew that time was running out. The drive to the mansion was tense. The road was dark and winding, and every shadow seemed to hide something sinister. By the time I arrived, I was a bundle of nerves. The mansion loomed before me, its windows like empty eye sockets, staring into the void. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. I made my way to the front door, which was ajar, creaking ominously as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale and musty, filled with the scent of rot and decay. The floors were covered in dust, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling like tattered curtains. I followed the coordinates, winding through the dark, labyrinthine corridors. Every step echoed loudly, and I felt like I was being watched. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, as if they were guiding me. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Anger, malice, and a strange sense of urgency. Eventually, I reached a large, dimly lit room. In the center was a table, and on the table was an old, ornate box. It was intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize, and it seemed to pulse with a dark energy. I approached cautiously, my flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. As I reached for the box, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. The shadows in the room began to shift and move, coalescing into the same twisted humanoid figures I had seen before. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and their mouths stretched into grotesque smiles. I grabbed the box and tried to run, but the shadows blocked my path. I swung my knife wildly, but it passed through them as if they were made of smoke. They closed in on me, the whispers growing louder and more frenzied. Desperation took over. I dropped the knife and pulled out the journal, frantically flipping through the pages. There had to be something, some clue or answer. Then I saw it, a drawing of the box with a single word written beneath it: open. With shaking hands, I opened the box. Inside was a small antique key, its surface tarnished with age. As soon as I touched it, the whispers stopped and the shadows froze. The room was plunged into an eerie silence, but then the figures began to melt away, their forms dissolving into the darkness. The door creaked open, and I knew I had to get out of there. I grabbed the key and ran, not stopping until I was outside, gasping for breath. I made it back to my car and drove home, my mind racing. I had the key, but what was I supposed to do with it? The whispers were gone, but I knew this was far from over. Jake was still out there, and I had a feeling this key was the answer. I just hoped I could figure it out before it was too late. Back at my apartment, I examined the key more closely. It was old, made of some dark metal, and covered in strange symbols. I had no idea what it unlocked, but I knew it was important. I spent hours searching for any information, but nothing seemed to match. Exhausted, I finally fell asleep, the key clutched tightly in my hand. My dreams were filled with visions of the mansion, the asylum, and Jake, always just out of reach. I woke up drenched in sweat, the key still in my hand, its surface warm to the touch. I knew what I had to do. The game wasn't over. I had to find the next clue, the next step, and I had to do it soon. For Jake, for myself, for whatever twisted reason this was all happening. I just hoped I had the strength to see it through. 3 days had passed since I found the key, and the whispers had returned, more insistent than ever. They were no longer just whispers, but voices, clear and distinct, urging me forward. I couldn't make out everything they said, but one phrase stood out: the church. I did some digging and found an old abandoned church, on the outskirts of town. It had been closed for decades, rumored to be the site of dark rituals and disappearances, the perfect setting for the next part of this twisted game. I prepared myself for the visit. This time, I brought a stronger flashlight, extra batteries, my trusty knife, and a small first aid kit. I also wore a sturdy backpack with supplies, just in case I needed to stay the night. The voices were relentless, filling my head with a cacophony of warnings and threats. The drive to the church was nerve-wracking. The closer I got, the louder the voices became, as if they were excited about what was to come. I parked my car a little way off, hidden behind some overgrown bushes. The church loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the night sky. Its windows were shattered, and the front doors hung open, swaying slightly in the wind. I approached cautiously, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The interior was just as eerie as I had imagined. Pews were overturned, and debris littered the floor. The air was thick with the scent of mold and decay. I moved slowly, listening for any signs of movement. The voices in my head seemed to be guiding me, leading me deeper into the church. I reached the altar, where a large, ornate cross hung crookedly on the wall. Behind the altar was a trapdoor, just like the one at the warehouse. My heart pounded in my chest as I pried it open, revealing another set of stairs leading down into darkness. I took a deep breath and descended, the voices growing louder with each step. At the bottom, I found myself in a small stone-walled chamber. In the center was a pedestal, and on the pedestal was an old leather-bound book. The cover was adorned with strange symbols, similar to those on the key. I opened the book, and a cold wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing my flashlight. I fumbled for my spare batteries, cursing under my breath. When I finally got the light back on, I saw them again. The shadowy figures, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They surrounded me, their whispers now a deafening roar. I knew I had to act fast. I flipped through the pages of the book, looking for anything that might help. Then I saw it, a drawing of the key, and beneath it, a symbol I recognized from the mansion. I placed the key on the symbol, and the ground beneath me began to tremble. The shadows closed in, their hands reaching out to grab me. I felt a sharp pain as one of them clawed at my arm, but I didn't stop. I pressed the key harder into the symbol, and a blinding light filled the chamber. The shadows screamed, their forms dissolving into the light. When the light faded, I found myself in a different place. I was no longer in the church, but in a vast, empty void. The air was cold, and the ground beneath me was smooth and featureless. I looked around, but there was nothing as far as the eye could see. Then I heard it. A voice, clear and strong, calling my name. It was Jake. I ran towards the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. As I ran, the void began to shift and change, forming into a twisted version of the warehouse where this all began. I found Jake in the center of the room, chained to the floor. He looked pale and emaciated, but his eyes were filled with a mixture of hope and fear. I rushed to his side, trying to free him from the chains. "It's a trap," he whispered, his voice weak. "They want you to stay. They need a new player." Before I could respond, the shadows returned, swirling around us like a dark storm. They spoke in unison, their voices merging into one. "Welcome, new player. Your turn has come." I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and I was pulled away from Jake. I fought against the pull, desperate to free him, but it was no use. The shadows were too strong. They dragged me to the center of the room, and the floor opened up beneath me, revealing a pit of darkness. Embrace the game, the voices said. Become one with the shadows. I was thrown into the pit, the darkness swallowing me whole. I felt myself falling, tumbling through the void, my mind filled with the whispers of the shadows. They told me of the endless game, the eternal cycle of players and shadows, of those who had come before and those who would come after. As I fell, I saw glimpses of other players, trapped in their own nightmares, their faces twisted in fear and despair. I knew then that there was no escape. The game was eternal, and I was now a part of it. I don't know how long I fell, but eventually I landed on solid ground. I was back in my apartment, the key still clutched in my hand. The whispers were gone, replaced by an eerie silence. I looked around, but everything seemed normal. Too normal. I checked my phone and saw that no time had passed. It was as if I had never left, but I knew the truth. The game had taken me, and there was no way out. I was a prisoner of the shadows, forever bound to the eternal game. I could still hear Jake's voice, faint and distant, calling for help, but I knew I could never reach him. The shadows had claimed us both, and there was nothing left but darkness. I sat in my apartment, clutching the key, my mind racing with the events that had transpired. It was as if the world outside had frozen, waiting for me to make the next move. The silence was oppressive, bearing down on me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching me. Determined to break free from the nightmare, I decided to visit the last place that had any connection to this twisted game, Jake's apartment. Maybe, just maybe, there was something there that could help me understand how to end this once and for all. Jake's place was a mess, just as he had left it. Papers and clothes were strewn everywhere, his computer still humming softly in the corner. I rifled through his things, looking for anything that might give me a clue. I found a notebook under his bed, filled with scribbled notes and diagrams, all centered around the game. Jake had been obsessed, trying to figure out how to beat it, how to escape. One page caught my eye. It was a rough sketch of a symbol, the same one I had seen in the book at the church. Below it, Jake had written a single word: convergence. I didn't know what it meant, but it seemed important. I pocketed the notebook and continued my search. I found an old VHS tape labeled "Watch Me" in red ink. Jake didn't even own a VHS player, so I wasn't sure how he had intended to view it. I decided to take it home, hoping it would provide some answers. Back in my apartment, I dug out an old VHS player from my closet. I had kept it for nostalgia's sake, never thinking I would need it again. I plugged it in, inserted the tape, and hit play. The screen flickered to life and showing static for a few seconds before a grainy image appeared. It was Jake, looking haggard and scared. He was sitting in his apartment, the same place I had just been, speaking directly to the camera. "If you're watching this, then you've entered the game," he began, his voice shaking. "I don't have much time. They're coming for me, just like they'll come for you. But there's a way out, a final challenge. You need to find the convergence." He held up the same notebook I had found, pointing to the symbol. "This is the key. The convergence is where it all ends. But be warned, it's not what you think. You need to be ready for anything. Trust no one, and don't believe what you see." The screen flickered again, and Jake glanced over his shoulder, his eyes wide with fear. "They're here," he whispered. "I have to go. Remember, find the convergence. It's the only way. The tape ended abruptly, leaving me with more questions than answers. What was the convergence? Where was I supposed to find it? And what did Jake mean by not believing what I saw? I spent hours poring over Jake's notes, trying to make sense of the cryptic messages and symbols. Eventually, I found a set of coordinates different from the ones before. They pointed to an old, abandoned factory on the outskirts of the town. It was a place I knew well, a place where we used to hang out as kids. The convergence had to be there. I gathered my gear and headed out, the voices in my head growing louder with each passing minute. They seemed excited, almost eager, as if they knew the end was near. The factory loomed ahead, a monolithic structure of rusted metal and broken windows. The air was thick with the smell of oil and decay. I made my way inside, the darkness swallowing me whole. My flashlight barely pierced the gloom, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I followed the coordinates, winding through the maze of corridors and rooms. The voices were a constant presence, guiding me deeper into the heart of the factory. Eventually, I reached a large open space filled with old machinery and rusted pipes. In the center of the room was a large circular symbol painted on the floor, the same one from Jake's notebook. This was it, the convergence. I stepped into the circle, the air crackling with energy. The shadows around me began to shift and move, forming into the same twisted humanoid figures that had haunted me from the beginning. Their eyes glowed with a sinister light, and their whispers filled the room. "Welcome to the convergence," they said in unison. "You have proven yourself worthy. Now, you must make a choice." A doorway appeared in the center of the circle, leading into a void of darkness. "Step through the door," they continued, "and you will be free. But know this, freedom comes at a price. To save yourself, you must condemn another." I knew what they were asking. They wanted me to sacrifice Jake, to leave him trapped in the nightmare so I could escape. It was a cruel, impossible choice. I could feel the darkness pulling at me, urging me to step through the door. I took a deep breath, remembering Jake's words. "Trust no one, and don't believe what you see." I looked around the room, at the figures and the door, and realized the truth. This was the final test, the ultimate deception. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key, holding it up for the shadows to see. "I know what you are," I said, my voice steady. "I won't play your game anymore." The shadows recoiled, their whispers turning into angry hisses. The room began to shake, the symbol on the floor glowing brighter and brighter. I closed my eyes, focusing on the key, willing it to unlock the final door. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the void, but this time, there was a light ahead, a path leading out. I followed it, the voices fading away behind me. The light grew brighter and brighter until it engulfed me completely. I awoke on my apartment floor, the key still in my hand. The whispers were gone, replaced by a profound silence. I looked around, half expecting the shadows to return, but they didn't. I was free. I never found Jake, but I know he's out there somewhere, trapped in the game. I can only hope that he finds his own way out someday. As for me, I've sworn off the dark web and anything remotely related to the game. The key sits on my desk as a reminder of the nightmare I endured, a warning to never delve into the unknown. The convergence was real, and I survived it, but I'll never forget the shadows, the whispers, and the terrible choice I had to make. And I'll never stop looking over my shoulder, fearing the day they come back for me.